I'm feeling a bit of Russian Revolution today, mainly because I have to do that essay thing to like tomorrow-ish on like Unit 7, which is World War One, World War Two, and everything that happened in between. And to me, that's all like common knowledge, or I feel like everyone to some aspect knows World War One happened, World War Two happened. People know the general causes and details, and like everything in between is like just white noise. And I guess in high school you get the finer details of what happened, but generally World War One, World War Two, and everything in between was basically a review of stuff you already know. But the one thing I did learn in this unit that happened between World War One and World War Two is the Russian Revolution, which is interesting to me mainly because the Russian Revolution kind of inspires the Chinese Revolution in some way, supposedly, and we haven't learned about that yet, but I'm sure we will. But I figured I may as well review the Russian Revolution just to brush up on it, and teaching is the best way to retain knowledge. So there's actually several revolutions, which is really annoying because it makes it more confusing, but it's actually pretty interesting too. But for context, I guess, to lead up to the first revolution is that there's like four reasons. The first one is the Tsar, who is essentially the king of the entire country. The Tsar of Russia, the Tsar system is essentially, you have a Tsar who's the king, who's pretty much a dictator, I would say. He like has all the power, no one really stops him, he just like does everything on his own. But the Tsar of Russia is, being conservative and hoarding all the power and not doing any political reform. So essentially, he doesn't modernize, he doesn't like change anything in government. He likes the way it is because he has all the power the way it is. He likes the way it's been done because he gets all the power. So he doesn't change anything. He likes the way it is. But the people don't like the way it is. So his inability to change and desire for power has led to the pissing off of the citizens and general population. So they don't really like him because he doesn't do anything important. And this happens through several generations of czars, of kings. But the final straw is Tsar Nicholas II, who is the final Tsar before he gets overrun, and then the Tsar system is destroyed. But first reason is the Tsar is incompetent. He just doesn't do anything for the people. Like, the people just don't really like what he's doing. So first reason is the Tsar. Second reason is the Russo-Japanese War. I did not know Russia and Japan ever fought, like ever, but supposedly between World War One and World War Two, Russia and Japan had conflicts probably around East Asia, because where else? But I don't actually know why they had a war, or it wasn't even like they had conflicts. I'm assuming it's definitely just territorial like expansion, like Japan. I would assume it has to do with Japan being very imperialistic, because we learned Japan had that. We learned Japan embraced the Western style of imperialization. They also thought they were the best type of Asian and thought they deserved to conquer. So Japan was doing a lot of conquering. I'm assuming that's why Russia and Japan had a conflict. But I'm assuming with Japan conquering, they know how to conquer. They also have advanced weaponry. Russia's kind of getting destroyed. So Russia's getting some heavy losses on the east side of the country due to Japanese fighting, and it's slightly, worsening the mood of the already worsened mood. So you got the Tsar, you got the war between Japan, already worsening the people's mood. Thirdly, most of the country is supposedly peasants for some reason. I guess they haven't really upgraded their country up to the modernized level. There's not really jobs going around. They haven't industrialized. Like I said before, the Tsar doesn't change anything. It's a very old-fashioned country. So majority of the population is peasants, and they have no land, and therefore they can't really feed themselves or sustain themselves anyway. They're kind of just like dying, and like they're starving. So the peasants are obviously in dire need of help, and the Tsar won't help them, and no one else will help them. So they're also getting pissed off. Basically, everyone's getting pissed off. And the last reason is World War II. Russia is getting slapped in World War One, not World War II. Russia is getting horribly defeated in World War One. Apparently, if I remember correctly, our teacher said Russia's casualties consist of like 40 to 50% of all the casualties in World War One. They also apparently had like very limited supplies. So the teacher told us for every 3 Russian soldiers, only one of them had a gun. Whatever the other 2, I have no clue what they do. They just like run around and do nothing. They pick up a gun off dead people. So it's all shambles. Russia's in shambles. But they are taking heavy losses in World War One. This is of course just further ruining the mood of the country. And also, when World War One happens, the Tsar Nicholas II, he kind of leaves the capital to go fight, as any leader should. And then as he leaves his wife behind, and his wife has a special condition where she has some kids, and those kids, one of the kids has this condition where when he bleeds, his blood doesn't clot, so he's basically just like very prone to dying at any day. So the wife puts a lot of trust into this weird hobo who does magic medicine. So the weird hobo is supposedly healing her child and saving him from death. In reality, he's just a hobo who apparently has a really bad reputation for being an alcoholic, a womanizer, and whatever bad crap he is. But the wife of the Tsar putting his trust in a hobo is not the best look for the country or for the Tsar. So that they kill the hobo. They send an assassination for the hobo because nobody likes him. So that is also just another added factor that makes the Tsar kind of look really stupid. But all of these mixed together basically amounts to people are pissed off at, the world in general, their country. They think everything's going to shit. So they think the Tsar is trash. They're going to overthrow the Tsar. That's where the first revolution comes in play, March Revolution, 1917. The woman decide to do the protest. Our teacher made a big deal. They're like, you notice how the women do the stuff because they take the initiative first. But something like that. The woman protests against the Tsar about bread because they're starving. There's a starvation going on. Like, everyone's starving. All the peasants are starving. They have no land. They have no food. They're kind of pissed off. So they go to protest in front of the Tsar's mansion or wherever he is, and they protest. And the Tsar tells the soldiers, go shoot these protesters, get them off my lawn. And then the soldiers go to shoot the protesters. But a major turn of events, the protesters actually convince the soldiers to join them because the soldiers realize the protesters have a validly justified reason to be protesting. Like, the Tsar is being pretty useless. So the soldiers realize, these protesters got some sense in them. So they join the protesters. And when the Tsar has no soldiers left, because they all join the protesters, the Tsar cannot do anything. He is overthrown, and he resigns. So Tsar Nicholas II resigns from power, and then what replaces him is this weird new system of temporary government called the Duma, which is essentially a democracy. At least they attempted one. So there was an attempted democracy that overturned the Tsar system, and the government is now a democracy, but this only lasts for 7 months because they are absolute garbage. Because the main thing they do wrong is the Duma decided to stay in World War I, because World War I hasn't ended yet. Everyone's mad about World War I, so they overthrew the Tsar, but the Duma continued to stay in World War I, even though they're awful at fighting for some reason. So the Duma decides to stay in World War I, casualties are still high, so the people are still pretty angry about, life, because they're kind of sustaining heavy losses in the war. The Duma, therefore, gets overthrown by a new government, the Bolsheviks, which is essentially a Russian communist group led by this little lad named Vladimir Lenin, a little legendary creature. So Lenin and his Bolshevik Russian communists, they overthrow the Duma, the democracy, and they promise the people peace, land, and bread. And they obviously gain the general support of the people first before they overthrow a government. At least they try to. So a lot of people agree with them. That's how they managed to overthrow the government. And now Russia is communist. And the issue with that is not everybody's on board with communist Russia. So that leads to a civil war within Russia between essentially democracy lovers and communist lovers. Except the democracy lovers aren't necessarily democracy lovers, they're just anti-communist. Some of them want the Tsar back, some of them want other things back, they just don't want communism. So they unite through their hatred of communism, and they say, let's have a civil war. So it was whites, which was democracy, versus red, which was communism. And the result of the civil war is communism wins, because communism had a united, more structured army, while the white team, the democracy team, they weren't really structured, they weren't really united. They were just people like, we don't like communism, let's fight. So they fight, but they're not structured. They lose to this nice structured army. They lose. Communism wins. They turn Russia into the USSR. I have no clue what that does or why the name change means anything. I probably didn't pay attention in class. But Russia at that point on is then the USSR, the Soviet Union. What a great rename. It's amazing. But when communism wins, Lenin says, we're at communism now, except he doesn't really do that properly. He instead says, we're not smart enough for communism, we're going to do a dictatorship because people aren't smart enough for communism. And supposedly my teacher said, no country has ever in history successfully implemented communism to its fullest extent. It always ends up being a dictatorship, apparently, which makes sense because communism is essentially the people fully functioning themselves in a way, so that would never happen. So obviously, I guess it makes sense that a dictator would ultimately end up coming to the top to just kind of make sure everything's actually working the way it should. So Lenin becomes a dictator of this communist Soviet Union, and then he implements the new economic policy because Russia is still in an extremely low point. They drop out of, oh yeah, let's talk. He needs to fulfill his promises to the people. When he promises peace, land, and bread, he does fulfill these promises, which is a pretty good for a dictator, I would say. He gives peace by dropping out of the World War I, so Russia's finally out of it. They don't need to send people to die anymore, so they feel more peace, more at peace. Land, he gives land to the peasants, so they're not complaining about it anymore, so fulfills that promise. Bread, I'm assuming giving land to the peasants also gives them farmland. I'm assuming he also fulfilled his promise on bread. It's just giving out the supplies to the people. Like, it shouldn't be that difficult. But he fulfills these promises, and then he also does the new economic policy because Russia is still kind of broke and in shambles after World War I and all the general. They're not really modernized yet, so he does this new economic policy. It's a mixture of capitalism and communism, basically letting little businesses thrive a little bit. So this little mix of communism and capitalism does work. Russia is restored to pre-World War I level economics, so they are finally back at a pretty good place. So Lenin has successfully brought Russia back to a solid location, but unfortunately Lenin dies, which brings us Stalin. And there were other options because when Lenin dies, there's a giant power vacuum. Everyone's like, oh, I want to be the next dictator. Stalin eliminates all his political enemies and then takes dictatorship like an absolute king. So Lenin dies, Stalin kills everyone, or all his enemies, and then he becomes a dictator. He becomes the next dictator. And this is the final chapter of Russia's main change in history. Stalin first implements his 5-year plan to completely reform the economy, and this consists of a fully communist economy, meaning the government takes literally all the money and redistributes all the money in whatever way they see fit. But basically, the government controls the money. Every piece of money made, it's going to the government, and whatever you need will be given by the government. So it's all communist. Government is controlling literally everything. And then he also does what I'm assuming this is a major part of the program is the emphasizing on industry, most specifically steel, the steel industry. My teacher said supposedly he would give these factories extremely high production quotas, saying make me this amount of steel, and it would be an absurd number. I don't know what the standards are, so maybe he'll say make me 15 billion tons of steel, and then he tells them do it or die, and then the workers are like, frick, we gotta do it or die. And when people are when people are given the option to work or die, people will most likely work, which is what happens because he sets these high quotas, he tells them do it or die. Whoever doesn't do it dies, and then they get replaced. So then whoever's left ends up doing it. They meet these crazy quotas, and then Russia's economics gets sent through the roof. They go crazy, apparently. And they are brought to, the third most industrialized or something? Whatever was in the notes. But, Russia goes crazy in terms of their steel industry, and then they basically just, bring their economy from, good to, crazy. All through the use of terror and, threatening people to work or die. But it works, so who is to judge history, right? He also tries this collectivization idea, whereas I don't get actually I got it, but then I don't get it, now I don't get it. He took land from the farmers, he says this is now government's land, but we still want you to work, and then he gave the farmers a quota to meet. He says, this is our land, we'll give you stuff you need to survive, but this is technically our land, you're also going to farm it, and you're going to give us everything you farm, and you're going to meet these farm quotas, or else, presumably, death. But it doesn't work, because apparently, I guess even motivated with death, nobody wants to work for crops that aren't technically theirs if they just get sent straight to the government. So, if it's not their crops, they're not going to work as hard. So, the production levels in farms with collectivization does not work. And then, Stalin gets quite mad. It also meets some resistance from some certain wealthy peasants or something who don't like the program, and general work ethic is lower. So Stalin starts a purge to try to kill these wealthy peasants resisting the program. Stalin starts a purge for literally anyone resisting the program. Anyone who doesn't like Stalin, anyone who's resisting the program, anyone who, is being bad according to his standards, instantly executed. He has the secret police, he has concentration camps, he has, guns, he has literally anything. He kills anyone who gets in his way. Political rivals, just bad citizens, whoever he wants, just to make the country operate at maximum efficiency. Now, that's obviously where he gets known. He gets his reputation as the killer type of dictator who's renowned for killing literally everyone who gets in his way. So that's essentially it. But yeah, Russia goes through several phases. The March Revolution goes through democracy. Democracy gets taken over by communism, but not everyone likes communism, so there's a civil war between communism and democracy. But then communism wins again, so then communism is there. At that point, they're pretty much fine. Lenin brought back Russia to a pretty good point, and then they said, and then Lenin dies, and then Stalin comes in like, hey, we're at a good point. Lenin brought us to a good point, but we're gonna keep going, and I'm gonna threaten to kill you if you don't follow my plan. So Lenin brought him to a good place, but Stalin said, nah, let's keep going. Stalin kept going. He forces people to work or die. People work, and then, you know, Russia becomes a quote-unquote world power. I would assume they still are, considering right now. So I'm assuming this is a pretty impactful thing. So Stalin basically kills everyone who gets in his way, kills any bad people, anyone who doesn't follow the plan. And then, as a result, Russia becomes an absolute godly country. Or it's not even Russia, Soviet Union. I think it's back to Russia again. I don't know what happened since this lesson. But Russia has become quite, you know, strong in terms of everything. And after this, World War II happens, so this is obviously, you know, that happens. But that is essentially the gist of it. Stalin, this is a good background history for Stalin, because then you learn about World War II, where Stalin and Hitler become friends, and then not friends, and then, you know, Stalin joins the Allies, and then World War II wins, and, you know, all that good stuff. But this is the Russian Revolution, which is one of the only things that I actually learned this unit, because everything else was pretty much common knowledge. But yeah, hopefully this will help me on some sort of test or something.